think we're just about at 7, so I think we'll get started. What I thought I'd do tonight is something that actually I've probably done other times, but perhaps not with a view to using it on knits, and that is decorative stitching. And I have got a slideshow. So what I think I'll do is I'm just going to talk for a minute or two about some other finishes, because I think it all needs to be looked at. So let me go onto my slideshow and we'll just transition over to that. So we're looking at decorative seaming on knits, and you can see the stitches I'm going to get to and demo. But before I get to those, I just want to consider manufactured garments. And a number of manufactured garments have an interesting finish, which is done by an industrial cover stitch machine. And they have an extra looper on the upper side. So you get this nice stitched finish, which we don't have on our domestic sergers. Um, and I want to go on and say that most of the time, but not all the time, these are the fabrics are laid overlapping each other, and this gives a nice flat seam. And this is just a cover stitch, so it's not suitable for everyone. Not everyone has cover stitch. I have done a video on it, and it is on my YouTube channel, Deb Canham Studio. Okay, it's called Triple Cover on Exercise Wear. So that's all about cover stitch, and I'm not actually going to be featuring that today. But I'm not going to be demoing it. I'm going to be talking about it. Some sewers use 3-thread overlock and stitch over the seam with a triple cover stitch on the wrong side, and that gives you a look that looks pretty similar to the manufacturer's look. And a lot of you really like it, and it is very popular. The trouble comes when the seam's very thick, and I just want to say it does reduce the stretch slightly. So let me take you over to my table here, and I have a piece sewn out here. And what it is just a triple, sorry, a 3-thread overlock, 3-thread overlock. So I've sewn the seam with my 3-thread overlock, and then I've opened it and pressed it, and then I've used a triple cover to sew it down. Now, I used it with the straight stitch being the right side. I could have used it with that green stitch being the right side. That's perhaps more common in some ways, but you can do it either way. And you have a nice flat seam. It still has some stretch to it. It's a little bit thick. Of course, if you're using a really thin fabric, that's not a big deal. But this is a knit, and for me, I think that's quite a thick seam. But I want to show you this one because this is the one I feature in the video. And this one, it's the same type of, well, you can see I've used the underside of cover stitch. So the chain looper side is showing on the front of the garment. And what I did with this is I overlapped it. So the seam is very thin. I didn't use 3-thread overlock to make a seam and then fold it. I just overlapped it, and I used steamer seam to hold it in place, and then I stitched it from this side. There's my straight stitches, just about see them, and I got that nice finish on the outside. So that is a look that a lot of people like, but you do have other options, and that's really what tonight's video is about. It's about your other options. So let me go back to the slideshow so I don't lose my way. As you know, I can. So we've covered that slide. So what I'm talking about is flatlock stitch. And flatlock stitch can be done on any serger. The advantage of it is that you pull on the seam and the fabric slides flat. This flattens the bulk in a seam, which has a number of advantages for piecing, for seams on baby wear, exercise wear, and just plain decoration. So let's go back to my table and have a look at what else I have. So here we have, well, let's have a look at this jacket. This jacket, I did all the seaming using Flatlock. Okay, and that's Flatlock where I've put the thread in the needle, and I'm going to go through and show you the different ways to do it. So it just makes for a really nice flat seam on fleece. Okay, and then this is a blanket stitch, which is a variation of Flatlock. So we're talking about seaming here. I sewed two pieces of fabric together and I put the decorative thread in the needles and I got this nice flat seam. But you can also do it where you just find the you can also do it where you have the decorative thread in the lower looper and you can get this nice finish. And you can see that this is flat, okay? It's not a bulky seam, it's a very flat seam and it stretches. It stretches well and it is a good stitch. It's substantial. Can you see I'm really pulling on this and it's not falling apart? Now, I would recommend you try it on your fabric because if your fabric isn't substantial, that might be a different story. But let's go on to the next slide and we'll see what's going to happen next. So, flatlock stitch. You have several choices of flatlock stitch. You can have a two-thread flatlock, which I prefer because it pulls flatter. There's also a three-thread too, which will give you a more substantial stitch because it has an extra thread. If you are using the two-thread, you will need to engage your subsidiary looper, or sometimes called two-thread converter or upper looper converter. Whoops. Right, so let's look at flatlock stitch. Now, I said to you that it was all about seaming, but actually it's really a good edge finish stitch too, because it's very soft. You're only using two threads and it gives a nice soft finish. So nice for fleeces, blankets, towels, baby stuff, those baby but cloths and things like that. It's just a nice soft stitch. You're only using two threads. And you can see it in the picture here, the variegated greens and orange and pink, all my colors, is the result of putting that thread in the lower looper. And the blue variegated, which is thinner, is actually the result of putting that in the needle. And I'm just sewing on a single piece of fabric right on the edge. So I'm talking about flat lock stitch on knits as an edge finish. And I think if you think about things like sometimes on a knit garment, you'll have a ruffle, okay? And it's very common to use a rolled hem on a ruffle, but actually it's quite a hard stitch. So if you're gathering it, it kind of resists the gather. I know you're not gathering that edge, but it still stiffens the fabric. So it's worth thinking if you've just got a single piece of fabric, you're doing a ruffle, it's worth thinking about the two thread flat lock. And remember, you can do it wide or narrow, okay? You can choose what width you use. So that is about the edge stitch, and I didn't want you to get confused with what I'm going to go to next, which is using it in a seam. So here we have flatlock, and actually I used a narrow flatlock on this one. Quite often I use the wide and I put ribbons and decorative stuff in it, but this is just a narrow, and I put the decorative thread in the needle. When you put the decorative thread in the needle, you're going to put right sides of the fabric together. You're going to stitch on it and pull on it, and you will see rungs. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that on my table. So here it is. It's just rungs, okay, but substantial. It's still substantial. And on this side, I use the decorative thread in the chain, in the looper, in the lower looper. Sorry, didn't mean to say chain. So you can see that you get the different look. So when you're doing it this way with the decorative thread in the needle, remember you can use a top stitch needle if it makes it easier because your thread is thick. And you're going to put, let me go back to my slide so I don't get it wrong. So when your decorative thread is in the needle, you're going to put right sides together. So let's look at decorative thread in the lower looper. Decorative thread in the lower looper. So when you put decorative thread in the lower looper, you're actually going to place your fabrics wrong sides together. And that feels really weird, but you are, because your decorative stitch is going to be on the top. So I repeat, when you put the decorative thread in the lower looper, you're going to place the fabrics wrong sides together and stitch. And you will get this zigzaggy stitch. And let's have a look at it on here. And there it is. And you know, I've used a decorative thread so it really highlights it, but I think that's a fabulous finish. And as I said, it's a lot stronger than you think it's going to be, okay? So where could we use those? Well, anywhere where we're sewing fabric together, I think a lot of people use it on the outside of a pair of pants where you've got a seam in the outside just to look pretty. But if you're making a t-shirt or anything, you can use it in your side seams. You could use it. There's no reason why you can't use it throughout, to have that pretty finish. And I've seen some people use a flatlock wave, and that gives a nice finish, but that's just a little bit stiffer. So if you're going to use that, make sure you use a fine thread. But something like this 8 weight, I've got the 8 weight is the heavy thread here. It's an 8 weight Wonderful Eleganza. Okay. Now in the needle, let me get you closer. Can you see? No, I can't see it. Oh, yeah, saw it there. The blue is actually a 12 weight and it is accent. Okay, so I've put two decorative threads in there, so I had a choice. If I was actually making a garment, I wouldn't put the decorative thread in the side that I wasn't going to display. I just did that for the demo. So let's go on to the next slide, and it says, oh, we've done that one. So that's what I did. I called it Flatlock blowout because I put the decorative thread in the lower looper and in the needle, okay? And this would actually be really good if you wanted something that was reversible, okay? That you'd have the pretty stitch on both sides. Now I think the lower looper stitch is bigger and thicker and more visible than the rungs. But as I said, the rungs are really great for threading fabric through. So let me just check what my next thing is. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask Richard if we have any questions. Let me check. No? Have you refreshed the page? Okay. Right. I'm going to have a quick look through. Yeah, Eva says she sews scraps together with to get new yardage. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do too. Do I have my yellow quilt around here? I had it the other day, but I don't know where it is. Right. Right, somebody had trouble with their video stopping, but I think it's still running. Still running my end. Will we use Flatlock in the upcoming leggings class? The thing that with that upcoming leggings class is we are actually just doing a one-piece pant. So our seam is on the inside. So it wouldn't be that visible. And I don't know that you'd want decorative thread on the inside of the leg. But if you were doing leggings that had an outside seam, yes, I think that would look really cute. I'm just not sure it would work for what we're doing that day, but we'll certainly discuss it. What size needle would you use with a 12 weight? Um, you can use an 80 or a 90. It really what works with your fabric. It pretty much anything will work with that thread. It's more to do with the fabric, and it may be that you need to use a ballpoint needle or a top stitch needle. But I always think with knits, a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't change my needle," and I agree. I don't always change mine. But if you have ladders, they won't happen as you're sewing. They'll happen when you wear it and wash it, and then it's too late. So I always think it's just a little safety to use a ballpoint needle if you can. And don't forget that the ELX705 comes as a ballpoint needle too. It has SUK written after it, and they're the ones I use. And I generally use a 90 on the um, Baby Lock. On the Benina, I'd be a bit keener to use an 80. Do you have any vibrant classes available? Yeah, it is a great little machine. No, I did one on the Celebrate, but I haven't done one on the Vibrant, but I probably should. Somebody said I just made yoga pants after watching the video, but the threads are not stretchy enough. I used regular thread. Should I have used woolly nylon in the loop or something else? Honestly, I think regular thread works just as well as woolly nylon or stretch thread. Um, I don't think it matters. It should be stretchy. Did you four thread overlock is your stretchiest stitch? Um, I I don't know where it wasn't stretchy. Where people sometimes have a problem with leggings and things is when they cover stitch hem the ankle. Sometimes it's a little bit tight. Okay, but I've no idea why your yoga pants didn't stretch more if you were using four thread overlock. And I don't think the thread would have made a huge difference, but it's certainly worth trying. For review, when sewing a flat look, the loops hang off the edge of the fabric. This way the fabric can lay flat, correct? Um, Karen, I don't think on something like a knit it's so important as it is when you're using a thicker fabric like a fleece. If you're using something fairly thick, then yes, make sure that the stitches fall off the edge just to give it more room to cope with the thickness. But for something as flat as this knit I'm working on, I didn't sew off the edge. Okay, I didn't. But that was a good mention. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sew on the edge and then I'm going to sew a seam and show you how easy it is to do. I did the thread cover like you showed using steamer seam. Okay, yeah, I would agree with you that cover stitch is not as stretchy as and that's really a good point. Cover stitch is not as stretchy as it's stretchy, but it's not super stretchy. The advantage of the flat lock is it's a lot more stretchy because you haven't got that double seam. It's flattened out. Okay, so it may be worth giving this method a try. But I agree with you that cover stitch is not it. I'm not saying it. I always say cover stitch gives, it doesn't stretch, and I think that's a fair and especially when you've sewn over it. You know, you've got the two seams. I know you haven't because you used the method in my book and you just use cover stitch, and I would agree that it doesn't stretch as well as some of the serger stitches like the one I'm showing tonight. Nancy, that doll class is still available. It's still available, and you can go back and watch it again. So what I'm going to do is move you onto my machine, and I'm just going to show you a couple of things on there. I should have moved the camera before I moved. Sorry, look away if you get giddy. Right, well, what I want to say firstly is that remember when you're doing flat lock that you have your subsidiary looper engaged, okay? It just flips over. Pull it to the right and it flips over on the Triumph. I think on the Ovation it just flips over. On the Bonina it just flips over. Okay, so I have engaged that and I have decorative thread in my lower looper. It's the heavier 8-weight thread because that's where I'm going to get the loudest stitch. And I have 12-weight accent in the needle. Remember, I only have two threads, so I've got no other choices. And I am just going to feed it in next to the needle. And I do find that when I use this on the very wide, it sometimes just curls up a bit at the edge because I'm working on a single layer and it's a knit. And I want to tell you that I have my differential feed on 1.3 because this is a very vulnerable piece of fabric. It's going to stretch very easily. So you can see that it has slightly curled. But what you're going to do is press that and it will go completely flat. But I think it makes a really nice edge for a ruffle. So that's just using it as an edge finish. And on this side, I've used a blue thread. I hope you can see it. It's a variegated. And we just have that zigzaggy type stitch. But it's very soft, okay? So let's look at it as a seam finish. Okay, that was edge finishing, different thing. Now we're going to sew it as a seam. So say this was a pair of pants that I'm sewing outside, and I want my decorative threads to be, well, they're both decorative threads. I want the pink thread to be the main decorative stitch in this thing. So I've actually put wrong sides together. Okay, wrong sides together, which is something that it's difficult for us to do that because it's not what we normally do. So wrong sides together. And my stitch is going to actually sit on the top. And you can see it didn't curl as much because it was a bit thicker thread, thicker fabric. It was two pieces of fabric. And then what you're going to do is you're going to open it up and just pull on it and see how it just slides flat. Now, if you feel it isn't flat enough, then your other option is to stitch slightly off the edge. And I'm going to do that as well. And I would recommend using your lace applicator foot if you have one, because it will give you a guide to go along. I'm going to eyeball it. And I'm stitching so that my fabric isn't quite touching the knife. So I have a little bit of fabric stitch, sorry, falling off the edge. Not hugely visible, but I was about 1/8 of an inch away. And now I'm going to pull on it, and it should slide slightly flatter. So it depends on what fabric you're using, okay? If your fabric is thick, then you will need to use that method to get it to lie flat. But I think you'll agree, it's a super good seam. I mean, it's going to look pretty on a child's t-shirt or have all the outside seams using decorative thread. And this is actually a cotton, but I don't think it matters. I choose my threads per my threads, not by my fabric always, to get the look I want. But I think it's a really fast and easy finish. And I think in many ways, for me, it's, I want to say, better than the triple cover stitch in that it's more stretchy, my seam is flat, and you can sew it on the edge. When you do that cover stitch, you have to sew it down the center of the fabric. So therefore, if I'm doing the outside of a leg, then I have to do that first before I sew up the insides. But this you can do on any seam. So let me come back to the front. So that is what brand is your variegated thread you're using? It is Eleganza by Wonderful. It's 100% cotton. It's one of my favorites. What is the hairy thing to your left? Lol, it's moving. Oh, the hairy thing to my left is my knit jacket. It's moving. It's the fans going. Oh, Nancy, you're looking for more kits. Yeah, I will as soon as I get a chance. As soon as I get a chance. Right. So I don't think I have any questions, which is unusual. So I hope you're going to try that. I hope you're going to use it, and I hope you're going to put pictures up in the group to show us how it went. Only it's super easy, super pretty, and just a great finish.